Good afternoon. Today is Monday, the 2nd of March, 2026, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. Delighted to have Ben Rubin with me in the studio.
Delighted to be here, Brian.
And we're also pleased to have Diane Rasmussen, who will be joining us by live link. Well, what a day we've got. Did anybody expect to be arriving on Monday, the 2nd of March, with such momentous events over the weekend? So Saturday and the start of the joint Israeli-US attacks on Iran with amazing backlash. So the supreme leader of Iran, the Ayatollah, dead. We've had Iranian counterattacks on a number of countries, particularly American bases in Bahrain, Kuwait and Qatar. We've had drones launched against RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus, and we've also got Israeli attacks against Lebanon. So as a result of Trump's decision, or was it Israel's decision to launch the attacks on Iran? We've got major violence erupting across the Middle East, and we're already seeing the first reports and articles saying, has Trump got this one right? But I'm sure, like many of you, I was feeling over the weekend, my goodness, does this never end? As yet another war is fomented, principally, in my opinion, by the West. And I know in speaking to people over the weekend, a lot of people feeling quite down. Now, a huge amount being reported by the mainstream media over events in Iran. UK column, we're going to come in at a slightly different angle, so we're not going to spend huge amounts of time on all the same reports that are appearing in the BBC, CNN, whatever it is. We are going to pull this one apart because at the end of the day, we are looking at the desire for regime change in Iran. Now, in the news overall, aside from Iran, we're going to have a look at what Modi has been up to. So, Ben, you're going to be having a look at Modi's visit to Israel. And what is all that about? Well, it's a big package of a combination of AI and digital ID. We're also going to be having a look at how Epstein is already disappearing into the long grass, pushed down by principally events in Iran. Ben is going to be having a little bit of a deeper look into Restore, and Diane is going to be taking a particular look at what's happening with our children, everything from Queer Fest to that sexual education, which really forms an attack on the minds of our children. So let's kick off straight away with Trump announcing, it appears with, I can't quite say great joy, but he was certainly very enthusiastic, what he's done for the attack on Iran.
The United States military began major combat operations in Iran. Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime, a vicious group of very hard, terrible people. To the members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, the armed forces, and all of the police, I say tonight that you must lay down your weapons and have complete immunity, or, in the alternative, face certain death. Finally, to the great, proud people of Iran, I say tonight that the hour of your freedom is at hand. Stay sheltered. Don't leave your home. It's very dangerous outside. Bombs will be dropping everywhere. When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take.
So the president's address there, followed by some footage of bombs dropping in the region. But the message very, very clear. It's just a combat operation, apparently, just a minor thing going on. But this is apparently the start of freedom for Iranians. And of course, that very direct message for Ukrainians to take over from their government in order to get freedom. So, Ben, in my mind, no question, this is regime change in order to have an Iranian regime which will do as the West and Israel requires.
It feels very familiar, doesn't it? It's like George W. Bush all over again.
It is. And just on that note, Diane, I'll bring you in very quickly, because when we were speaking earlier this morning, you mentioned that years ago you had a conversation with some individuals. Just tell us about that.
Yes, thanks, Brian. And hello, it's great to be here. I just wanted to say, back when I did my PhD on photojournalism, which was in the early 2000s, and I spoke with Pulitzer Prize-winning photographer who covered the invasion of Iraq in 2003, and they saw the same thing over and over again, where it was just sort of like, well, basically saying, well, Saddam Hussein said that, well, no, they have weapons of mass destruction, do they not? It was all part of the narrative after 9/11 to go back into war in the Middle East, and we saw the same thing in the early 90s, Bush Sr. So once again, I think we're just seeing that pattern repeating itself over and over again, and we see it here once again, Ukraine in 2022 potentially, and now here we are again in 2026. We need something else to do, so here we are again, Brian.
Diane, thank you very much, and I agree with that. Well, let's have a look at Starmer now gleefully announcing that, of course, the Americans are going to be able to use whatever British bases they want. It's all for peaceful means, you understand. So here's the Prime Minister.
The United States has requested permission to use British bases for that specific and limited defensive purpose. We have taken the decision to accept this request to prevent Iran firing missiles across the region, killing innocent civilians, putting British lives at risk, and hitting countries that have not been involved.
Well, I'm sure I won't be alone in feeling quite honestly nauseated by this man's hypocrisy. But of course, Ben, it's all defensive. This is nothing about offence against Iran. This is all peaceful defence.
Of course.
Of course.
Even though they changed the name of the Department of Defence to the Department of War.
Indeed. And just that clip that has just played, I was interesting that if Mike Robertson was here, he would be saying, note the double cross in the way that the flags were folded on either side to the rear of Keir Starmer in that 33-second video clip from the government. But be that as it may. So let's have a look then at John Healey speaking about what's happening with Iran.
Is it a good thing that the Ayatollah's dead?
No one will mourn his death, not least those friends and families of the tens of thousands of young protesters that were murdered on the streets of Iran in recent months. But make no mistake, this is a regime that he has run for decades as a source of evil. It has murdered its own citizens, it's exported terror, including to Britain. And my concern now is the increasingly indiscriminate attacks from Iran widely across the Middle East are putting British personnel and British people, civilians, at risk. And so my first job as Defence Secretary is to protect those British people, civilians and military, our British bases, reinforce regional security and do all we can to prevent further regional escalation, which is what the Prime Minister was talking about yesterday.
So you think right now Iran's retaliation is putting British troops and British civilians at risk across the region?
It is indeed. Let me confirm a few fresh details for you. When I talk about increasingly indiscriminate attacks, I know people at home will be worried that not just military targets were hit yesterday, but also we've seen hotels in Dubai and Bahrain. We've seen Kuwait's civilian airport. But in that Bahrain military base that was hit by missiles and drones yesterday, we had 300 British personnel, some within several hundred yards of the strike.
Well, just incredible. I would have thought that it was Healy's job to have sorted all this out before the UK government gave approval for attacks on Iran. So no preparation work there, it would appear, Ben, in order to make those necessary protective measures before the violence unfolded. Violence is orchestrated, and then, oh dear, we've now got to decide what we're going to do to protect British troops. I find the whole hypocrisy of it quite disgraceful. But of course, we've got a Labour government which is hell-bent on getting involved in any war it can overseas if it thinks it's going to gain the party presumably is going to gain out of it. But regime change is the key subject. And this is very easy now to discern because, of course, much of the media is turning to the views of Iranians, not only living in UK, but in the West. So here's the time. Trump vows to press on. And you can see the emotive picture of demonstrators with or celebrating people with the flag, selfies, V for victory. But essentially, we've got a bellicose UK and Western propaganda, which is helping the UK's Iranians celebrate as US and Israeli bombs fall on Iran. This is really incredible, Ben, that you can have people that are now happy to see bombs falling on their own homeland because it is going to give them greater power. I'll explain this in a moment. Let's have a look at the Daily Telegraph here. Big headline, Britain backs war on Iran. Has war been declared? I don't believe it has. So this is essentially another unlawful war that's been unleashed. But if we put in some text from the Telegraph article, they said that anti-regime Iranians outside the Iranian embassy in London were celebrating the combined US-Israeli strikes into Iran. So a few weeks ago, many of these people desperately concerned at the people killed by the regime in Iran, but now celebrating on the streets that bombs are coming into to Iran as the country itself. It's quite extraordinary. BBC is on the bandwagon as well, but slightly less. Here's British Iranians take to streets of Manchester hours after US-Israeli strikes. And no question what this is. It's the BBC helping ramp up support for Iranian regime change. Now, if we take a couple of quotes that appeared in the BBC article, this was a gentleman called Farid. He said, "I don't want to fantasize and think the politicians, have our interest in mind. Obviously, any politician thinks about their own and their country's interests first and foremost. But at this moment in time, personally as an Iranian, and any other person who I've spoken to, there is no other way in front of us." So this man feels it's essential to get this attack in on Iran in order to get the regime change. And another man, Daniel, who in the same BBC article, and he said he reckoned that many compatriots at home and abroad support the attacks for the time being, and those at the rally wanted to be the voice of Iranians. So, got to say very gently, these people are unelected, but they want to be the voice of Iranians. Now, this was a very interesting Wall Street Journal article, pretty powerful image. And the caption that is at the bottom of the screen says, "Our parents marked into Iran's 1979 revolution. They know the dangers of groupthink." And this was just part of the text, but I think it's very relevant. It said, "My mother's single greatest regret is marching for the 1979 revolution in Iran. She was a 23-year-old medical student, newly married and pregnant for the first time. When protests broke out to oust the Shah, she showed up for her community, a tight-knit cluster of graduate students who were frustrated by his extravagance and tyranny. And she thought she'd spend the 1970s in fashionable bell-bottom trousers and unveiled with a stylish haircut." So this woman, now looking back, realised that what she thought was going to happen didn't happen, and she was caught up in it. Now let's have a listen and watch this very interesting video assessment, which is focused on a man called Taghi Amirani, who is putting some of the detail around history and the overthrow of the Shah of Iran.
Look to the 1953 CIA and MI6-backed coup in Iran that removed democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh and brought back to power the Shah, an authoritarian dictator friendly to U.S. and British interests. The British and Americans didn't anticipate that their interference would ultimately set the stage for an Islamic revolution led by the Ayatollah Khomeini, which began the repressive theocracy that rules Iran to this day.
I'm standing in front of a filing cabinet of a drawer full of documents that essentially changed the fate of my country.
In the new documentary Coup 53, director Taghi Amirani argues that this covert operation became the template for American interventionism all over the world. And like so many future conflicts in the Middle East, it began with the desire among Western powers to protect their oil interests. Elected in 1951, Mossadegh had made good on his promises to nationalize the industry.
And this didn't go down well with the British, who were obviously standing to lose a very, very lucrative resource. They joined forces between CIA and MI6 and staged a military coup to overthrow Mossadegh and put the Shah back in power, who was much more amenable in doing an oil deal with the Western powers. On paper, it was a huge success. It was quick, it was cheap, no American lives were lost, and it got the results pretty quickly. And I thought, well, we no longer need to put boots on the ground. We don't need to get into wars. I mean, don't forget, at the time, America was fighting a hot war in Korea, even considering dropping a nuclear bomb. So this was a trouble-free, easy way of changing leaders you didn't like.
It didn't turn out to be so trouble-free. In 1979, student protesters stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and held 52 hostages for a year and a half, precipitating one of the tensest diplomatic showdowns of the past 50 years.
Why do Iranians, I don't condone it, why do Iranians shout death to America? Death to America didn't just come out of nowhere. There's a very good analysis of why even the hostages were taken. I don't condone taking hostages, let's be clear. But the reason those students raided the American embassy was because of this. The 53 coup in Iran, it became the playbook for future coups. And in fact, the next year in 54, they went to Guatemala and overthrew Jacobo Arbenz. And of course, Pinochet, Allende in 73 in Chile. In Chile, it was copper. In Iran, it was oil.
So a pretty valuable little clip there, I thought, Ben, giving some background to what's been going on in Iran. And of course, is it as simple as made out in Western media in 2026? Absolutely not. But how sad that we now have large numbers of Iranian people who are so desperate to see that regime change that they're going to follow along with an aggressive attack on Iran. I think it's tragic.
It is. It is tragic.
Okay, well, let's move through to Modi and Israel, since everything that Israel does at the moment appears to be either war or helping the rules-based international order come into being.
It's certainly the centre of attention this week for conflict, last week for a extraordinary state visit, actually. So we're going to talk about Narendra Modi, Prime Minister of India, who touched down in Tel Aviv for a state visit to Israel. This is important geopolitical context for the conflict that's kicked off just 2 days after the visit ended. But also we're going to look at how India sits at the centre of the transformation of global governance and economic activity, and Israel is a key partner within this. So you saw him there getting a big handshake, big hug from Netanyahu, inspecting troops. He was actually the first Indian leader to speak before the Knesset as well. And we're going to have a listen to a few of the remarks that he made to the Israeli parliament.
Honorable members, it is a privilege and an honor for me to stand before this distinguished House. I do so as the Prime Minister of India and also as a representative of one ancient civilization addressing another. I bring with me the greetings of 1.4 billion Indians and a message of friendship, respect, and partnership. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your kind invitation and for your wonderful gesture of lighting up the Knesset in Indian colors.
Two ancient civilizations talking to each other.
And lights which would appear to be a global warming problem to me, but there we are.
Yeah. Yes. Quite remarkable. I mean, essentially, if you think about the context of this, everything's been going on in Gaza over the past 2+ years, and then Modi flies in and essentially says, we are here with you together as partners, and not just myself, I'm also bringing 1.4 billion Indians with me and delivering a message of respect and partnership. Right. He then went on to talk about the October 7th attacks. Let's have a listen to this next clip.
Honorable members, I also carry with me the deepest condolences of the people of India for every life lost and for every family whose world was shattered in the barbaric terrorist attack by Hamas on October 7. We feel your pain. We share your grief. India stands with Israel firmly, with full conviction in this moment and beyond.
That was a momentous event.
Yes.
Which has largely gone unnoticed, apart from your good self bringing this forward for UK column viewers.
Yeah, he's kind of gone by the sidelines. But I mean, this is, and certainly this is a big win for Netanyahu. You can see him sitting there, you know, looking very pleased with himself. Let's bring him up on screen. There he is. So Netanyahu's there. You've got Ben Gvir on the right-hand side, who has been personally evicting Palestinians in the West Bank over the past few days. I've seen video clips of that. You've got Bezalel Smotrich, who last year said no one in the world will allow us to starve 2 million people, even though it might be justified and moral. And then Modi's essentially come in and validated all of this. He's validated the official narrative around October 7th attacks, which was all Hamas. There's nothing else to understand about it. And then unequivocally and completely given Israel India's backing for any past, current and future actions. That's what we're looking at here. Astonishing. He also went on to reveal that he was born on the same day that India recognised the Israeli state, on 17th of September 1950. He talks about a number of Jewish tribes that exist in India, establishing this kinship between the two countries, and then delivered this extraordinary quote, which is that Israel is the fatherland and India is the motherland.
Yeah, there's something offensive about that statement, just in the language, never mind what the meaning is.
Well, quite, yeah. I mean, one can only imagine
Israel, the fatherland.
Yeah. Wonder what the conjugal situations are like back home. Anyway, and essentially what this is doing is reinforcing, and this was a screenshot from an AIPAC speech that Netanyahu delivered back in 2018, where he was talking about turning the map blue, and obviously India, part of that global empire, that blue empire, and this just reinforces that, essentially.
But of course, the key area there in red, if we just put that one back on screen,
Yes.
is where we need the trouble and the regime change in order to ensure that an even bigger and directly relevant piece of the land map goes blue.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to watch this unfold.
Isn't it just? So there was 17 minutes of that, 17 minutes of respect and pleasantries before they ultimately ended up getting down to business. Let's hear what they wanted to talk about.
For the last few years, India has been the fastest growing major economy in the world. Soon, we will be among the top 3 economies globally. At the same time, Israel is a powerhouse of innovation and technological leadership. This creates a natural foundation for our forward-looking partnership.
1.4 billion people, world's fastest growing major economy, going to be one of the top 3 economies on earth, running on technological infrastructure given to them at a price from Israel. Now, that's what this partnership amounts to. They talked about the inspiration that Modi himself and other Indians took from the kibbutz movement, so the settlement of Israel through the 20th century and still up to the current day. But then, and particularly as it relates to agriculture, but then they're talking about expanding this across every other sector of the economy. So right. Israeli technology, Israeli operational standards pushed down into 1.4 billion people by a compliant political class headed up by Narendra Modi. Essentially, he's offering this up to Netanyahu.
Lots of questions to be asked.
And now, yeah, absolutely. And then let's just have a quick listen to one of the key assets that the Indians have built that Modi was very keen to talk about.
Last week, we hosted the world's largest and the most democratized AI Impact Summit with representatives from over 100 countries. Our aspirational spirit aligns naturally with Israel's innovation ecosystem. I see a lot of synergies in areas such as quantum technologies, semiconductors, and artificial intelligence. We are also working with Israel on creating cross-border financial linkages using our digital public infrastructure.
So this is the digitization of the economic, political, cultural systems, not just in India, but internationally. And Modi's convened summit, which took place the week before last, which was attended by 100 countries and essentially becomes the epicenter of artificial intelligence, governance, innovation globally.
And intelligence services, actually, we could put on top of that, Ben. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly. So what was that all about? This is casting back. So those are some clips from the speech to Knesset. You should go and watch that yourself. We'll put a link to it in the show notes. This is the AI Impact Summit delivered last week. Very exciting. Tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people, all the big tech CEOs, and this is basically AI everything, healthcare, government, pharmaceuticals, education, you name it. Apparently, it was a bit of a car crash on the ground, so there were some reports that it was poorly managed, venues spread across the city, total deadlock in traffic, conflicting information being given to delegates and security about who was supposed to be able to access what. Bill Gates had to pull out because of the Epstein files. But still, people were there, and our esteemed former unelected Prime Minister Rishi Sunak was beating the drum for artificial intelligence on behalf of the British people, essentially. You know, this is kind of unelected statesman type role that he's given himself. You can see him here talking at a Tony Blair Institute event to the chief AI officer from Meta, a guy called Alexander Wang, who was 29 years old. He's a 29-year-old who's dictating artificial intelligence policy. And this is obviously a continuation of Sunak's involvement in this space, because he was the first person to convene an AI summit at Bletchley Park at the end of 2023, which we spoke about a lot at the time. And he's now currently shilling for this technology in the Times and various other places, and at the same time on a retainer working for Goldman Sachs, Microsoft and Anthropic, the second two of which are both artificial intelligence companies. So he's probably doing quite nicely out of this. This is in a long line of India's involvement in this space with this technology, with this new paradigm that we're being ushered towards. We spoke back in September about Nesta Policy Live, where they had this chap, Pramod Varma, building for billions, 1.4 billion, in fact, individuals who have now been ushered onto this technology platform in India. Just a month after that, Starmer was there on a trade mission saying that we're going to a country, India, where they've already done ID and they've made a massive success out of it. And actually, he was on his way when that statement was made to a meeting with the chairman of this company, which is Infosys. Chairman is this guy, Nandan Nilekani. It's an old picture from 2007, but you can see him there speaking at the World Economic Forum. He was actually on the World Economic Forum Board of Trustees. In 2024, he issued a joint white paper with the general manager of the Bank of International Settlements called Finternet, which essentially is creating a new type of internet predicated on financial transactions, this digital payment infrastructure, CBDCs, which is the primary control mechanism for this new global order that we're being marched towards at the moment. Infosys, interestingly, was founded by this guy, Narayana Murthy, who's now on the board of the UN Foundation, still an emeritus role at Infosys. And his daughter, Akshata Murthy, happens to be married to Rishi Sunak.
Just a coincidence.
Absolutely.
Just a coincidence.
Yes, indeed, yes. Infosys also, just a couple of final points on this. Infosys is a strategic partner of the World Economic Forum. It also works closely with Common Purpose. So the head of design at the Infosys Leadership Institute has said Common Purpose is a crucible for a set of very powerful ideas. And we know that India was a big target for Cameron et al. When they were pushing into their next phase. Once they'd done the UK and they were moving internationally, India was absolutely on that list. And just as a final point, Akshata Murthy, Rishi Sunak's wife, was at one point a co-director of a health company which took £630,000 out of the furlough scheme during COVID before going bust. And one of her co-directors was this guy, Mr. Rupert Lowe, interestingly enough.
Just a coincidence. Okay, a lot happening. So as we watch the horrific events unfold around Iran and the Middle East, what we see is the march for the rules-based international order to continue. And certainly with it comes digital control, AI control in all forms. So people need to really stay focused on a lot more than the images that are appearing in the papers at the moment. And what are we seeing? Well, of course, it's a spin of information all about the conflict. But of course, now we're getting casualties, 3 US troops dead, 3 F-15s shot down. I think that was in Kuwait. The crews survived, but casualties are now starting to happen. And if we just pop that one, there we are, bring this in on screen. Let's remind ourselves, going back to the turbulent times around 9/11, that we had the former Labour activist Joe Moore saying that 9/11 was a great day to bury bad news. Well, maybe Iran is about Trump saying goodbye to Epstein problems. Now, let's just have a little look at a video clip here of the Senator Thomas Massie talking about Kash Patel, the head of the FBI. This is in relation, obviously, to Epstein.
Do you think that Kash Patel lied under oath in his testimony? We played the video for Attorney General Bondi, and she responded to it. But what do you make of that whole situation?
I provided the evidence today that shows that his statements were false under oath. Kash Patel's statements were false. They are in possession. They were in possession at the time, and they're still in possession of evidence that other men participated in the sex trafficking.
Attorney General Bondi didn't seem to directly answer that question. I mean, what do you make of what she did say?
She didn't answer anything. She came here just ready to talk about the Dow Jones and the NASDAQ, which seems kind of crazy to me.
So we've still not got a full investigation as to what's happened, apart the links to people in high levels of government and, of course, up to Trump himself. But it's taken a relatively small outfit, IB Times, to actually flag up some interesting email exchanges with Jeffrey Epstein, which seem to have relevance in the present times of the attack on Iran. So this is part of it here. So we've got an email which says that Trump pulling troops out of Syria is a bad sign. So this email is back in 2018, but it goes on to say Trump is up to something and it's not good. We've got further emails here saying, you guys need to understand that Trump is psychotic and would not blink twice at encouraging an attack on us, so he can leap to the country's defense. It's a mindset. If I go down, I'm taking everyone with. And this one here could be he doesn't want them there. If there's a much bigger operation, might put them in jeopardy. Reminder, he will take everyone down with him. I urge people not to corner a rat. They become extremely dangerous and unpredictable. And a final one in this chain here, and we don't know who this email exchange is with. We only had 2,000 troops there. If Trump were to bomb Iran, they would be slaughtered. So what is being pointed out in this article is that obviously around Epstein, very, very important discussions were taking place, not only at what would appear to be predicted events in the Middle East, but also in Trump's connections and his suggested ability to lie in order to cover up. So is that just a coincidence, Ben, or have we got more here which says the importance of Epstein files cannot be lost, even if we've got major war now beginning to break out in the Middle East? And if Mr. Massie's been speaking out, what was the result? Well, CNN here saying a defiant Thomas Massie takes on the MAGA machine in heated Kentucky primary. And the key part the article is bringing forward is that basically Thomas Massie and Senator Rand Paul under attack by Trump, who is literally working to try and oust particularly Thomas Massie for speaking out. And if we add a little bit more meat on it, it's now widely emerging across social media, YouTube at least, that Bill Gates had 2 affairs with Russian women. And he's apologising to staff, but the damage is done. And this is one of the key emails, which strangely is from Jeffrey Epstein to Jeffrey Epstein, but it starts off, Dear Bill. And the nub of this email exchange is a tiff between Bill Gates and Epstein, as basically the subject of sexually transmitted infections and Russian women and affairs breaks out. But I think we should pay attention to the fact that as Bill Gates was involved in this, apparently he was the sort of man with the substance to be advising the British government on COVID and how to deal with mass pandemics, but he was certainly panicking over how to deal with an STI.
And farming and everything else.
It is incredible, isn't it?
It is absolutely incredible.
When you see these things.
It is.
So the key underlying message is war in Middle East at the moment just being sold as simply to deal with that terrible regime in Iran. But when we look deeper, there are all sorts of things happening, from the march of the rules-based international order right through to the fact this is a perfect opportunity to suppress Epstein and the files and the links to people in very, very powerful political positions in the US and UK to push all that into the long grass. Now, Ben, one person has been doing some really astonishing work and taking the lid off on this.
Yes, absolutely. I want to just very quickly flag up some work that Escape Key has been doing over on Substack. So if you're not familiar, Escape Key is a writer and a systems thinker, and he's been very active on Twitter and then moved to Substack about a year or so ago. Did interview him last August, I think it was, talking about the central banking system. And he's done, there's a huge amount of material on his Substack. I'll just direct your attention to these 6 articles, which do fit together. It's quite a lot here. It's very technical, but it is extraordinary analysis. And essentially what he's done is map out how the Rothschild Foundation, through a series of events between 2014 and 18, disseminated the requirements for a digital monetary system, which is now being built by the Bank of International Settlements and is the primary enforcement mechanism for the UN SDG agenda. And the best example of the integrated technology stack is the one that's been built in India. Right, so this is exactly what we've just been talking about, right? And so this was formulated through the Rothschild Foundation, Bank of International Settlements, is now essentially the UN's primary control mechanism. And he then links that into the Epstein releases, the recent tranches that have come out at the end of January, and then also looking at the WikiLeaks emails that exposed a lot of what Hillary Clinton was doing about 10, 15 years ago. It's an extraordinary piece of work. It's fully sourced. It's all public domain information. And we'll put a link to it. I suggest going to have a look at it. In particular, I'd suggest sharing it with people who are maybe from a professional background. I've got a friend who's a partner in a law firm who I sent this to, and it's the first thing he's actually really reacted to, because it's extraordinarily difficult to push back on. So, yeah, I highly recommend that.
Excellent. And lastly, just remind UK audience in particular that the paedophile scandal below politics in the UK absolutely hasn't gone away. There's a lot happening behind the scenes, and there's much which the Met Police still will not bring to the surface about old investigations where more and more information is coming to the surface. So this independent article, just one of the connecting documents and of interest for people to read. Now, a huge thank you to everybody supporting UK Column as members or donating or purchasing through the shop. We can only do what we're doing with your support. And if you're listening in from UK or overseas and you're not a member and you'd like to be part of the team to actually help what we do happen, make it happen, get online to go to the website and you can click the blue button there to support our work. Now, tonight we've got James Dellingpole with Germ Warfare. The subject is the pursuit of truth. I'm sure that one will be interesting. And tomorrow at 1 o'clock, we've got Mark Anderson, who's going to be in discussion with a gentleman talking about money. This is the key thing that drives the world. It's about credit and money and the banking system. So I think this will be absolutely fascinating. Join in for that at 1 p.m. tomorrow. Now, Ben, you've been looking again at Restore. We are picking up very interesting information that Restore members are doing good work across the country, but there's still some questions around the man at the top and parts of the party.
Yes, there are some questions and information being revealed on a almost daily basis at the moment about Rupert Lowe. And although I sense that he and Restore have really tapped into something quite profound in the country at the moment, and people really are looking for a serious political alternative, I do have to ask whether Restore Britain and or Rupert Lowe are it. At the moment, they are riding high. They just hit 100,000 members over the weekend. In fact, I think apparently it's gone up again today. I saw Lowe posting about on Facebook. But I want to just redraw everyone's attention to this piece of information, which came from Charles on UKC News last Wednesday, which is that Lowe has appointed this lady, Orla Minahane, to Restore Britain. She's going to be their first official spokeswoman on women and girls' safety. She founded the Pink Ladies, a national network dedicated to protecting women from migrant crime. Wonderful to have her on the team. But what he didn't talk about in this was that she's actually a Deloitte employee. Yeah, so she is a program manager at Deloitte. She's just started again. She was there 3 years ago, the interim period she spent with HSBC. All of those organisations, Deloitte, HSBC, are strategic partners of the World Economic Forum. And having worked in a Deloitte competitor, EY, for 2.5 years after they bought the company that I work for, I can tell you now that the Deloitte partnership know exactly what she's doing and approve of it. Because if they didn't, then she wouldn't be doing it. She wouldn't be allowed to do that. Yeah, and this would have had to have gone up the chain. And for me, with an organisation that is nationalistic and Britain first, then having someone who is pretty much the first senior spokesperson announced after the launch of the political party, Restore as a political party, for them to be a World Economic Forum aligned individual is astonishing. It's absolutely astonishing. And for me, that would be on its own a deal breaker. Right. And so I think we have to call into question Rupert Lowe's judgment in appointing her and then very clearly not talking about her background, but then also ask the question, well, why has this happened?
All good questions, Ben. The other one I'm interested in is this is not to do with child protection. So this is women's subjects, which is part of a much bigger and softer agenda. Yeah. I'm still waiting for Lowe to get past the grooming gangs and onto the subject of the institutional abuse of children, which has taken place in this country over a very great number of years.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll see.
We shall see. Right. And actually, so I've been very active on social media. Let's see. Has he actually spoken about Deloitte at all? No. So he's never tweeted about Deloitte. He's never tweeted about EY, KPMG, PwC, McKinsey, Palantir. He's never said anything about Emphasis. He said a couple of things about digital ID, saying that he'd fight digital ID, but he hasn't talked about where it's come from. And he's appointed someone onto his leadership group who works for a company that is invested in the digital ID rollout. He's tweeted about the World Economic Forum once, saying that we must reject its influence on British politics, but he's then appointed a World Economic Forum person to his team. So he said one thing and he's done the complete opposite. He's never spoken about the Fabian Society. He's never spoken about the furlough scheme, interestingly, which is where that money came from with Sunak's wife in that business that went under. He has mentioned Epstein twice, but one of those was to thank Elon Musk for creating a free speech platform, which I think he means X, which is, interestingly, is actually more censored than most of the other social media at the moment. But what he does post about is if you search for illegal or Muslim or immigrant, then he's talking about that endlessly. And I think that tells us quite a bit, actually, about what he's up to, what he's focused on.
Indeed. And I'm just going to stress the point that we are getting some really good information from members of Restore who are clearly doing really good work, but there seems to be a mismatch between the knowledge of people, I'm going to say at the bottom of the tree, as to what's happening in the country and the world and what Mr. Rupert Lowe has to say. So our challenge is, if you're part of Restore, do you know what the actual policy is and how policy is being formed at the top of the Restore tree?
Yeah. And can you send some of these questions back up the chain and see what comes down? Because a lot of this feels inexplicable to me. Just a couple of final points. So Lowe has talked a lot about this idea of him being a farmer. He's trading on this idea that he's a farmer, but actually he was a city trader. So he made his money in the city. One time he was a board director of the London International Financial Futures and Options Exchange, which is about using financial instruments for banks to lock in interest rates. And to quote Jeffrey Epstein, this is how the Jew make money. There is a quote from the Epstein files, which is, "This is how the Jew make money." This is what Rupert Lowe has been doing, and then he's used that money to buy some land, which is hardly blood and soil, is it? I'm not sure that necessarily makes him a farmer, even though he is doing some farming. Although when he does have his wellies on, I would really love to know what he has to say about this, which is happening in his backyard up in Norfolk. So this is the Wild Kingdom from the team behind Wild East. Wild East started in East Anglia, in Norfolk, in fact, which is in Mr. Lowe's backyard. And this is about rewilding the UK. So we're not going to be farming anymore. We're not going to be growing food to eat. We're going to be turning the country into a nature reserve, essentially. And that's the way that they talk about what they do. It's about rewilding, regeneration, and, creating little holiday places where people can go and stay in a cabin or a bell tent or whatnot, when actually we're already importing 50% of our food. Don't we need to be growing more of it, not less of it? And interestingly, all of this aligns to the World Economic Forum agenda. Their partners are DEFRA, the National Grid, the University of East Anglia, which, like all universities, is actively engaged in delivering the United Nations SDG agenda. They have to, as Diane's spoken about a lot previously. And this has become a national network through this organisation, Rewilding Britain. And Wild East is run by a bunch of people, as these things are. You've got Ollie Birkbeck on the right-hand side. Apparently he went to school with Charles, by the way. But then the one that's particularly of interest to me in this context is Hugh Summerton, who is a deputy lieutenant of the County of Norfolk. That's what that DL means, right? So these are essentially the establishment operatives in the county. He's one of them. And interestingly, the Lord Lieutenant, so his boss, is this lady. This is Pippa Dannett, MBE, or should I say Lady Pippa Dannett, MBE, who's the Lord Lieutenant of Norfolk. She's also the patron of the Norfolk Community Foundation, which has been very closely linked in the past to Common Purpose. So actually Common Purpose graduates have been on its board. Advisory board members of Common Purpose have spoken at Norfolk Community Foundation events. Martin Edwards was talking about this back in 2011. And I would love to know what Rupert Lowe, as a good old farmer from Norfolk, has got to say about that. What about Wild East? What about the Norfolk Community Foundation? What's the Lord Lieutenant up to? And let's have a little look at your real credentials as it relates to farming and your opinion on this, Mr. Lowe. I'd be fascinated in that. And as a final point, this is going to be interesting to watch. Tommy Robinson's polled in over the weekend describing Rupert Lowe as our Trump and the only political figure that will save Britain.
Right.
So Tommy's going to get in the mix. This could get interesting.
So many questions to ask, and we'll stress this with our audience today. If you're looking into what is causing the breakdown in UK society, Western society, it's policy. Therefore, we have to drill in on who is making that international policy and how it's being put into force in the UK. This is the only route to being in a position where we can overturn what's happening to the country. So at the moment, there's lots of questions for Mr. Lowe. Maybe he's got very good answers. Do we know that people at the bottom of his party are doing really good work? We do know that. Diane, perfect time to bring you in, because at the moment, everybody is focused on what's happening internationally. They're very nervous about the wars, but actually it's the attack on society in our own country at community, family level, which is one of the real dangers. And you've been are working with some ladies who've been doing such a good job to challenge that policy. So this is ending the news, I believe, with a very positive story.
Yes, thanks, Brian. Yeah, and I think we do need to be aware of the fact that there are people around the country who are concerned about what is happening here on UK soil, not just what's happening around the world. And this goes into some reporting that we've been doing for a while with Protect and Teach, which is an organization based in Devon that is most associated with child safeguarding issues and making sure that children will not continue to be indoctrinated sexually and otherwise in schools and other institutions around the country. So in particular, this interview aired last week called Exposing Queerfest and the Attack on Our Children's Minds. I did this with members of Protect and Teach, specifically Jenny Dingsdale, Kathy Mudge, and Julie Blick, who are amazing women doing amazing work to try to protect our children in this country from what is happening to them in terms of sexualization of children and otherwise. And also there is a written article that goes along with this interview that Kathy Mudge wrote, which is called Queerfest at Exeter Library, Devon County Council's Child Safety Test. And these go together very carefully because, for example, there are quite a few very graphic images that appear in the written article that we referred to in the interview. So make sure that you look at both so that you can actually see the things that are being placed in front of children. When I talk about things that are in this, please make sure that you do not share this with your children, because we are talking about putting things in front of children as young as 8 years old, which is the youngest age that they are allowed to go into the library alone. And items included, for example, dildos, penis models, condom sizing guides, chemsex, which I didn't know about, which has to do with taking illegal drugs to enhance a sexual experience. And so obviously we see things that we should not be seeing and should not be in place in front of children. Protect and Teach, when they found out about this Queerfest event, which took place back in October, they approached the library and they communicated with Colum Elliott Archer, the center manager at Exeter Library, who has pronouns he, him, which appears in his email signatures, about the safeguarding issues around Protect and Teach. And part of his reply back to Kathy Mudge in an email said, quote, "Dear Kathy, I assure you that the concerns you raised in your message and during your visit today are not taken lightly. This event has been planned in line with Libraries Unlimited policies and event procedures." Libraries Unlimited is the organization that runs the libraries in Exeter. "All necessary measures are in place to ensure it runs safely and inclusively." So I decided to look into Callum just a bit. His LinkedIn profile doesn't show much other than he worked at a restaurant as a waiter. There's no other information about him. I did find a YouTube interview where he talked about his career in libraries and he talked about being a restaurant worker. So I know that is the correct Colum Elliott Archer. And I also found that he did not have the professional industry standard qualifications that are required to be a professional librarian in this country. So that is taken into consideration as well. So the final report for Queerfest, which was partially sponsored by a group called Out There, said that they talked about safeguarding. So this is within the report, and I just want to quote a bit from this, and then we'll go into a little bit more about the council. The report said that safeguarding was taken, quote, extremely seriously and ensured that it was in place. But what were they safeguarding is the question, and this is where we see kind of the inversion. And they said it was a response to external pressures, which I'm sure includes groups such as Protect and Teach, quote, framed as safeguarding concerns, but also containing misleading narratives commonly used to target LGBTQIA+ events. So they're trying to reframe the safeguarding issue as saying, well, no, actually, it's just a hate speech because they're targeting the LGBT community. And they also said that after the event, further misinformation, there's that word, was shared with local media, creating additional reputational pressures on Out There and partners. So they were flipping the narrative, saying that it was to protect LGBT children, totally avoiding the generic issue, the fact that children are being exposed to sexual content regardless of sexual orientation. So in December 2025, the council agreed to commission an independent review of safeguarding and risk management arrangements associated with things that happen in public spaces in the council. And then there was another council meeting last week. So following all of this background research, I spoke on Saturday with Jenny and Kathy of Protect and Teach to get their thoughts on it. So let's watch that interview now, please. So I'm just here having a quick conversation with Kathy Mudge and Jenny Dingsdale, who were two of the three ladies that I interviewed in our meeting about the Queer Fest, when we had a discussion about what happened at Queer Fest itself back in October 2025. And in further discussion, I've kind of been trying to understand what actually has happened at Devon County Council as we've proceeded from the October event until now in February, and what happens from here. So Jenny, welcome again to UK Column. I'd like to hear from you just a little bit about what you've gone through from the event in October, what's just happened the past few months, and then what you expect to happen next.
Thanks for having us back. Obviously, the event was in October, and following that, official complaints and lines of investigation were, attempted by Councillor Hill and others, including ourselves. The response to the event was almost more concerning than the event itself. Councillor Hill was certainly led to believe that the CCTV had been deleted, and that no risk assessment had been done, and, various other things. He proposed the motion originally back in December to try to review the safeguarding policies and stuff that have allowed this to happen. The response as well. In December, in the full council meeting, they basically spoke about things like pavement weeds and pavement parking, normal council business, potholes and whatnot, for hours, so that his motion never got time to be heard. Following that, the automatic standard practice apparently is to send it to the Cabinet to hear what they think about the motion. The Cabinet meeting where it was discussed was the week before last week's full council. In it, basically, I believe it was the head of Children's Services, presented a report that said that there was no safeguarding issues found. The library had done an investigation and they said there was no problem, and council accepted that, which basically undid the motion. So the recommendations that they proposed basically said, we note that council is fulfilling its safeguarding obligations and everything's fine. When it came back to full council last week, the motion there was amendments to the motion already suggested by Cabinet. As it was, they didn't even get to discuss the motion. They didn't discuss the amendments. They interrupted Councillor Hill 7 times just in trying to talk about the motion, because to talk about the motion, he had to talk about what led to it. But they did not want to speak about the event itself. My personal belief is because they know that this event was not suitable for children, and it was a safeguarding issue. It was an absolute farce last week, it really was.
Kathy, maybe you can summarize a little bit of the feelings and the thoughts that you had.
Well, I mean, it's definitely one of the things with councils is the party that they are with, they will toe the line of that party. So it's Lib Dems running the Exeter Council, and the Lib Dem party obviously believes in all this stuff. So they really just don't want to confront it at all. They don't want to talk about it. They want to shut it down. Now, it wasn't just Councillor Ian. Jenny was also interrupted, and we had people before her and after her who, again, you introduced slightly that what you're going to ask your question about, and they were allowed to do that and talk about the question before they actually asked the real question itself. And Jenny wasn't. She was immediately interrupted. They're ready for us as soon as we start. I mean, one councillor was made to sit down, Angie Nash, because she said the event at the library, and they said, no, we're not allowed to talk about that at all. And she was just saying the event in the library raised a safeguarding issue. That's all she was going to say. Then, no, you're not allowed to talk about the event. It's really demeaning, because most of us there were not public speakers. We are now, because we have to go all the time. We're talking about months of this stuff. We go along and we have to stand up in front of all these people who are obviously very anti-listening to what we have to say. And we just feel that they think if they play along long enough that we'll just go away. I feel very strongly that that's the answer. Again, they then said that they had recordings of the day, that they had the safeguarding done before the day, that the police had been involved before the day. So I've just done a Freedom of Information Act on all of those statements to clarify that, because, they've completely changed their story. And again, this group is investigating itself. So Libraries Unlimited has done its own internal investigation of itself and found itself not wanting. Well, what a surprise.
So other than that, what do you plan to do from here? I know that this has been moved now to the May council meeting, and I believe that some of you are going to try to attend that one, right?
Yeah, well, from our point of view, they did say that an LGBTQ hate group was involved in making a complaint about this. So we actually work with lesbians and gays within our group. So we'll hopefully bring them along to the next meeting to stand up for lesbians and gays and say that we're not a hate group. So that's one thing that we'll do. We'll be doing, I'll hopefully get the Freedom of Information results back and find out a bit more about exactly what information they've got so that we can ensure the questions we asked are actually directed. Jenny, you've been having quite a bit of contact, haven't you, with the council?
After the cabinet meeting last week and the full council this week, I have emailed quite a few of the councillors that stood up and spoke just to discuss what they were talking about. I've not heard back from any of the Lib Dems, you won't be surprised to know. But the Reform councillors have shown genuine concern about what's going on here. And I think they are naive to what's been happening. You know, they only started last year. A lot of them have never even been councillors before. So they really are learning on their feet. So hopefully in between now and May, we'll get in to have a meeting with them and explain what's really happening and why we're concerned and how we can actually address this in the council. So I don't expect they'll be able to do anything in the May meeting because it's actually the annual council meeting. So I don't think they normally discuss new motions at that meeting. But whether they'll try and bump Councillor Hill's motion to the next meeting or not remains to be seen. But I do hope that we will see some action from the other side of the council. So it should be interesting.
And can I just ask, are Lib Dems currently in power in the council?
Yeah, so it's majority Lib Dems, although it's not it's not a huge majority. There are a lot of Reform councillors as well, and still a couple of Conservatives and Independents. But they are the majority of the cabinet, the chairs of the committees, so they have a lot of the power, even though they don't have a huge majority.
Councillor Edward Hill was originally an independent and is now, I believe, is it Reclaim now? Or is it Reform or Advance? I think it's Advance, isn't it? Yeah.
He was Reform, then he went independent because he left the Reform group, and now he's gone to Advance.
So let's look at some of these councillors and put them on screen and look at exactly what they said and what they've been doing as in response to all this. First of all, let's look at Councillor Richard Keeling, who is the leader of the Lib Dems. That was one of the local councillors, Jenny's councillor in particular, who declined to comment on the event. So that's the leader of the Lib Dems. We can also let's go to Councillor Edward Hill, and he released a short statement that I got access to in the last few days. And I just want to read this out because he is the one who brought the motion after all. And he said, quote, "It is clear from the full council meeting that Devon County Council is uncomfortable with the possibility of allowing independent people to mark the homework of third-party providers. This attitude towards checks and balances and safeguarding is exactly how the scandal ran through the BBC, the Church of England, and more recently, the Pakistani Muslim grooming gangs. Self-investigation should be a thing of the past. It is a license to groom children while avoiding accountability, and Devon County Council must be subject to an independent investigation into its safeguarding practices and standards. Nobody should be above scrutiny." And then we can look at the statement released by Councillor Michael Fife Cook, who is the leader of Reform UK and Devon County Council. And he said, quote, "Any normal person would look at what was on show at this event and would believe it is not appropriate for young children. To allow future events like this in property owned by the public will be rightly deemed as reprehensible, and we will all be at fault. There may be people among us who feel it's acceptable for adults to steal children's childhoods. I truly hope not, but I am not among them." So I think what we're seeing here is a few different things. We're seeing that councillors are definitely trying to take local action. They're trying to do good things individually. But of course, as Brian has said before, they are interested in keeping their seats, but making them aware of what you see as the issues are actively very effective ways to hold them to account. I also want to note here in closing this report that Rupert Lowe back in November was sort of involved in QueerFest. The Mid-Devon Advertiser said that he was part of a discussion and responded to the motion made by Councillor Hill. And Rupert said, in part, quote, safeguarding should never be optional, inconsistent, or left to chance. Yet, as you have rightly highlighted, referring to Councillor Hill, that is exactly what has been happening at publicly funded events across the country. So that was in November of 2025. That was before his new party has taken the center stage in sort of this area. So my question is now to Mr. Lowe, what are you doing now that you have Restore and now that you're leading this so-called movement? What will you actually do if Restore is successful? Will you support the local councillors who are trying to do the best for their people? And hopefully, will you support local action? Because, Brian, that's what I believe this country seems to need based on what's happening to this report and these attacks on children that are constantly being covered up.
Diane, thank you very much for that. Yeah, key points. We'll do a lot more in UK Column Extra for our members shortly after the news. But here we have it, people now getting involved with their local authorities at local level, teaching themselves how to get involved with the council, how to make an impact. And it's very clear from the report that Jenny made that the council's not happy of members of the public on their turf and challenging them. So great to see people at grassroots level now tackling these issues. What's needed is for those who declared themselves as political leaders to come in and ask the real questions and lift the big stones that need lifting. So we'll save the rest of the discussion for UK Column Extra. We must end there. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Diane, for joining me. Huge thank you to the UK Column audience, wherever you are. Look at events, stay calm, and just remember that things are not as simple as the mainstream media would have us believe. We must end there. We'll be back for UK Column News at 1 o'clock on Wednesday. If you're a member of UK Column, stay with us for UK Column Extra shortly. Bye-bye.